Hello and welcome to All Generations. For Halloween, people sometimes dress like they are from a past time, such as dressing up as a flapper girl from the 20s or a disco queen from the 70s. But what were the most popular costumes during those times? Find out in this video. You can even get some Halloween costume ideas for yourself. Let's begin. In the 1920s, costumes tended to be homemade and simple. Crepe paper costumes were kind of a thing. You can actually still find books from this time frame about how to make crepe paper costumes or just paper costumes. So if you want to do a different kind of throwback, you could try that. Popular costumes in the 1920s were often in the spooky realm. For example, witches, ghosts, the moon. Less spooky costumes included the Pierrot clown and farmers, though some may find the first one scary. On to the 1930s. Between the Great Depression and mass-produced costumes not really being on the market yet, costumes were still homemade. Spooky options like goblins and witches were still in, as were scarecrows. When Ben Cooper started mass-producing costumes in the late 1930s, more people started getting these. Ben Cooper even got the license for certain Disney creations though, like Mickey and Minnie Mouse and Snow White, making those popular costumes. So at that time, they may have still been considered a luxury. This also kind of marks the beginning of costumes that were more specifically aimed at kids. In the 1940s, people would still make their costumes at home, but more were starting to buy them in the stores. Some general trends included paper mache masks and plastic masks. So masks in general. Clowns were a popular option. Classic spooky themed costumes like skeletons, witches, and cats remained. But this is when for older people we start to see some costumes get a little sexier because of pinup girls. The 1950s is where we can kind of get more into some different costumes. TV became popular this decade and pop culture exploded. Suddenly there were shows, people, style that more people would know about because they had seen it on TV.
Leave it to Beaver.
Television was more visual than radio, and thus provided more costume inspiration. People started taking from current events as well, like the launch of Sputnik. Mass-produced box costumes started becoming more affordable. Also, there was a big fascination with Hawaii at this time, due to servicemen coming back from there. This resulted in many people dressing up like Hawaiians, donning leis and grass skirts and big floral prints. Many consider some of the costumes inappropriate now. Same with some of the next ones. Due to westerns being popular, cowboys and Indians were big. Some other pop culture costumes of the time included Davy Crockett, Little Orphan Annie, Bullwinkle, Tarzan, and Zorro. Disney characters like Peter Pan and Tinkerbell, Mickey and Minnie Mouse, and Snow White were also popular. This is the point where I can touch on some of the top Halloween costumes of specific years. I couldn't find any specific real good data on just the most popular costumes in general of every year. You can find a little bit more of that if you look later, but definitely in these earlier years, I kind of looked at what other writers were doing, and usually they were just focusing on pop culture type stuff, books, movies, TVs, events, toys, etc. And so I just kind of drew from that. Plus it gives you a little more insight to the culture of the time, because ultimately the classic costumes have remained some of the most popular costumes, you know, your basic witch or cat or superhero, etc. With some coming and going, but with these you can get a little bit of an idea of maybe what was trendy at that specific time. I did not live through all of these decades though. So if you did, feel free to comment below and say if you think things are wrong or right, and tell me what you wore as well. Okay, on to some of the top pop culture type inspired costumes in the 1950s by year. 1950 top costumes included Norma Desmond from the film Sunset Boulevard.
Made up my mind, we'll bury him in the garden.
And cowboys, due to the westerns being big. In 1951, Tarzan and Alice in Wonderland were up there. In 1952, it was Dawn Lockwood from Singing in the Rain, which is actually a pretty easy costume to replicate if you have a suit, because then you just need to add a hat and an umbrella and pretty much you're good. In 1953, Peter Pan had just come out. In 1954, it was Batman. In 1955, Davy Crockett, due to the television series at the time. In 1956, the film adaptation of The King and I came out, making those characters popular costume ideas. James Dean's character in Rebel Without a Cause was another choice. In 1957, Frankenstein was big, as the character had been featured in comics and movies aside from the novel. Julie Andrews also played Cinderella this year, so some people probably dressed as Cinderella. In 1958, Zorro from the TV series Zorro. Also Madeline Elster from the Hitchcock film Vertigo. And finally, in 1959, Marilyn Monroe was a hit. She was in several films in the 1950s, so it was definitely on the radar. In the 1960s, pop culture was more solidified. Halloween costumes were also becoming more elaborate. Also, masks were big. As a whole, examples of popular costumes included singers like the Beatles, superheroes like Superman, Spider-Man, Catwoman, and Batgirl, TV show and movie characters from the Addams Family, Flipper and the Dolphin, and Dennis the Menace, and more, like Barbie and comic book characters. Now let's get into maybe what was big in the media and inspired costumes for specific years. And I think if you have parents who would have been alive during a certain time, it could be fun to ask them what they were for Halloween and kind of look at and see if they were any of these top costumes. So we already touched on the interest in Hawaii in the 1950s. What I didn't mention is that Hawaii became a state in 1959. So Hula Girl was a popular choice in 1960. Psycho came out in 1959, making Marion Crane the top costume this year as well. In 1961, the top costume I saw mentioned is one we still see today because it is such an iconic look, and that costume is Holly Golightly, played by Audrey Hepburn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. I've considered the costume myself multiple times. Only a year before his death, in 1962, JFK and Jackie O were popular. So was Rocky and Bullwinkle. The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle and Friends was a big series at this time. In 1963, people drew inspiration from The Lucy Show, which premiered the previous year, and the new movie Cleopatra, where Cleopatra was portrayed by Elizabeth Taylor. In February 1964, the Beatles appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show, sparking Beatlemania, at least in the US, because it was already a thing in the UK by this time, which, by the way, this is more US-centric. I Got You Babe topped the charts in 1965, so people replicated Sunny with her long dark hair and Cher. The Rolling Stones were also popular. In 1996, Barbie was up there. Those who sing up in 1967 often drew inspiration from The Addams Family and I Dream of Jeannie. While I saw Morticia listed, I think over time Wednesday has become the really popular one. I've actually dressed up as her twice, I believe in 2006 and 2014. The Star Trek series started in 1966, sparking some costumes because that can be a fun costume to do, but really it became, I think, more popular later on. In 1968, we have some things that make sense for Halloween. Casper, for one. Casper was featured in theatrical cartoons in the 1950s, as well as several TV series in the 1960s. And then there was Rosemary Woodhouse from Rosemary's Baby, which also came out this year. October 1969 was just 3 months after the first man landed on the moon, so astronaut was a popular Halloween costume for this time. On to the 70s. In the 1970s, one trend was people wearing more makeup. One example would be dressing up as Kiss. I think my mom said that her and her brothers did this. While I don't believe they were yet commercially produced, so probably not, again, at later levels, but sexy costumes started becoming more of a thing. An example of a sexy costume at this time is a Playboy bunny. This is also when people started wearing presidential masks, like Nixon. Some say the sale of presidential masks for Halloween can actually help predict elections. Despite the makeup, rubber masks were definitely still a big trend, and some examples of other popular costumes included characters from Star Wars, Charlie Brown and the Peanuts, Raggedy Ann and Andy, and Barbie and Ken. Now for some costumes for specific birth years. 1970 was Elvis and more Beatles. 1971 was all about Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which premiered this year. In 1972, it was The Godfather. And in 1973, the Brady Bunch was big. The Brady Bunch may have made for a great group costume for those big baby boomer families. 1974 was the year of Nixon's impeachment, and so there was that. The Great Gatsby film came out as well, so Daisy Buchanan was up there. In 1975, two huge films came out, Jaws, and the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Both inspired Halloween costumes, though the latter came out only in September, but I guess that could give some people enough time to get one together. Also just a month before Halloween, but in 1976, Charlie's Angels hit TV. And we're on a roll because Star Wars was introduced in 1977, making obviously for costumes like Princess Leia. In 1978, Halloween the movie came out, which represented a shift, which I'll talk about a little more in the 80s. But anyway, the release date was October 25th, 1978. So if people were dressing up as Michael Myers this year, they were fast. In 1979, the top costumes were Rocky and Superman. The 1980s are when costumes became more dark and gory. Before this, costumes were often spooky, but now they could be more weird and bloody and violent. A common costume at this time would be a werewolf or Dracula, but taking it to another level. The 1978 movie Halloween, which we mentioned, and the rise of slasher films are likely the inspiration. Another new trend was the emergence of brand name products like McDonald's, Fry's, or Lifesavers as Halloween costumes. E.T. was also big, and political costumes continued to be popular. According to the Daily Mail, Ben Cooper no longer owned pop culture-centric Halloween costumes, allowing kids to buy higher quality outfits to dress as Princess Leia, Freddy Krueger, or the Care Bears. Some of the other top pop culture costumes from the time were Elvira, which made for a sexy option with the big hair. In 1980, John Travolta movies were big, and so the roles he played tended to become in costumes. He was in shows like Saturday Night Fever and Grease. Others tried costumes like Daisy Duke from the Dukes of Hazzard. The year of Indiana Jones was 1981 when Raiders of the Lost Ark came out. In 1982, some popular costumes were Annie and E.T., which both came out this year. In 1983, the singers Madonna and Michael Jackson were up there. This is the year Thriller came out. One of Madonna's hits of this year was Holiday. Madonna continued to be popular the next year. In 1984, she released songs like a Virgin and Material Girl. Another big costume in 1984 was the Ghostbusters crew. In late 1984, Nightmare on Elm Street came out, making Freddy Krueger a popular option in 1985. 1985 was also the year Back to the Future came out, making Marty McFly, maybe the Professor, top Halloween costumes. Jem and the Holograms, an animated television series, made for some costume hits in 1986. Another interesting choice this year was the California Raisin. In the 1980s, the California Raisin Advisory Board, which is apparently a thing, made a little claymation, and I guess it was really popular, so some people even decided to be raisins for Halloween. 1987 pop culture Halloween costumes included RoboCop and Alien Life Form, also known as ALF. ALF. In 1988, Beetlejuice was one of the top films. An animated television series about Garfield came out this year in September, and probably some people did do this costume as many would have already had familiarity with Garfield from the comics. In 1989, it was more Batman and Ghostbusters. In the 1990s, there were several popular group costume options, including the Power Rangers, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Star Trek Space Voyagers, and the South Park Kids. Films like Space Jam, Jurassic Park, and Clueless inspired some costume ideas as well, as did TV show characters like Urkel. Now for some costumes by year. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles made their debut in 1990, so costume time. All three Back to the Future movies were out, so related costumes remained popular as well. In 1991, the second Terminator movie came out, so
I'll be back.
in 1992, we have the costume that I think I wore in 1992, which was Barney. But it wasn't just me. Barney was big for other people this time too. Catwoman was also popular. Barney was so popular in 1993, as were the Ninja Turtles. Power Rangers and Aladdin made it onto the scene. So there was some Aladdin and Jasmine. Jurassic Park came out this year as well, so you'd see some little dinosaurs roaming around. 1994 was still a big year for Power Rangers, but some other costumes you'd see worn by young people included Sailor Moon and Lions from The Lion King, which had just been released. The Simpsons were pretty big by this time as well, making them a Halloween costume choice for older kids or adults. 1995 was a big year for Star Trek. Both Deep Space Nine and Voyager were on air. In 1996, Toy Story characters like Woody and Buzz Lightyear were the rage for kids. The Spice Girls debut album came out and they were pretty immediately popular. I definitely remember already being a fan in 97, so probably 96 too. This would be a fun one to do as a group. In 1997, Austin Powers came out.
Yeah, baby! Yeah.
Inspiring some fun costume ideas. I remember many of my classmates talking about it at this time, but I was not allowed to watch it, I believe. The movie Scream 2 inspired some more classic type Halloween costumes. Batwoman and Catwoman were also big this year. And South Park came out in 97, so you would see some Cartmans and Kennys out in 98. The Big Lebowski also provided some inspiration this year. 99 is another Tarzan year, but Neo from The Matrix was an idea some older kids or adults tried out. Both came out this year. Now, in the 2000s, political scandal outfits were hot. Costumes of big singers were also popular, including Britney Spears, Jennifer Lopez, and Hannah Montana. From the fictional world, we saw costumes inspired by Harry Potter, Austin Powers, more of that, SpongeBob, Spider-Man, and The Dark Knight, with the Joker being particularly popular. Kids still often stuck to standard costumes like superheroes, pumpkins, and princesses. Anyway, pirates, Star Wars characters, and Tinkerbell were also trendy. Sexy versions of costumes also became more prevalent. In 2000, Reader's Digest says Britney was it.
It's Britney.
I feel like I remember her being super popular in the late 1990s, but 2000 is the year that she released her album Oops, I Did It Again, featuring hits like Lucky, which was a lot of 90s kids' favorites. Comment below your favorite Britney song. I personally ended up being a cat this year for Halloween though, and my sister was an angel. Josie and the Pussycats was a trendy group costume in 2001. While many grew up with the books, the first Harry Potter movie came out in late 2001, making characters like Harry Potter, Hermione big in 2002. A Spider-Man film also released in 2002, though superhero costumes have always been a classic choice, well, for a while. In 2003, popular costumes included Cat in the Hat, which I was that in 2002, so I guess I was a little bit ahead of myself. The The Wiggles, who I don't think I even knew existed. Bratz dolls, characters like Jack Sparrow from the Pirates of the Caribbean, which from my memory, pirates remained popular, and Flapper Girls due to the movie Chicago. In 2004, SpongeBob was a hit. This is also the year Mean Girls came out.
What are you? I'm a mouse. Duh.
In my memory, Mean Girls costumes actually started becoming more popular a little bit later, and they just really blew up, but this is when they would have started. Revenge of the Sith came out in 2005, and some more Star Wars costumes. In 2006, some were inspired by the new movie V for Vendetta. In 2007, some kids took on Hannah Montana, and in October 2008, the third and final High School Musical movie came out. So some chose to dress as characters like Troy and Gabriella. Since it was an election year, Obama and McCain were also hot picks. The Dark Knight may have also inspired costumes this year. In 2009, Lady Gaga was a hit, coming out with many big hits, and her style was crazy and fun to replicate. Twilight came out the previous November, and so between that and True Blood, vampires were big. Some celebrity deaths this year, like Billy Mays, Michael Jackson, and Farrah Fawcett, also inspired Halloween costumes. In the 2010s, we saw more mainstream concerns surrounding the idea of cultural appropriation, so more costumes were out, though ultimately everything still gets used as a costume by some. There were also more nostalgic costumes, like the characters of Hocus Pocus. Another new trend was costumes for pets, at least relatively new. Pumpkins, hot dogs, and bumblebees have been popular pet costume choices. And of course, the 2016 election inspired people to dress up as Clinton and Trump. Some other top costumes of this time included characters from Frozen, Marvel's Avengers, Game of Thrones, and Stranger Things, as well as Rapunzel, Miley Cyrus, and Harley Quinn. Onto the years. Princess and the Frog came out in late 2009, so Princess Tiana was a popular costume in 2010. The Jersey Shore cast, Twilight, and Justin Bieber were trending too. In 2011, Glee was a hit, so Sue Sylvester and her tracksuit was definitely a common pick, and I remember that. For younger people, Angry Birds were a top costume, maybe for some older people too. And definitely for older people, a drunk Charlie Sheen. Katy Perry was big and had recently come out with the California Girl music video, which provided costume ideas. I feel like I also maybe remember people dressing up as a plastic bag inspired by her song Firework. Nicki Minaj was another popular singer with some crazy looks, so that's inspired some Halloween costumes. In 2012, Hunger Games and Brave premiered. The Walking Dead was on, and the song Gangnam Style went viral. Miley Cyrus created more costume ideas in 2013. This time not as Hannah Montana though. Iron Man 3 was also released. Frozen premiered in November 2013, so I don't think I even need to mention anything else for 2014. It was Anna, Elsa, and Olaf all the way. In 2015, presidential candidates, especially Trump, were already costumes. Left Shark, a shark standing to the left of Katy Perry at her Super Bowl performance, who people thought wasn't a very good dancer, was a random hot pick. And Game of Thrones characters like Jon Snow were especially big. In 2016, aside from Harley Quinn and election-related things, it was a lot of the kids from Stranger Things. Wonder Woman came out in 2017, and since people love superhero costumes, that one was big. Katy Perry continued to inspire ideas. This year it was the backpack boy, / the flossing kid. While nuns had already been semi-popular costumes for a while, I remember people trying to do sexy nuns, drag nuns, etc. The scary movie The Nun came out in 2018, so people could take on scary nuns. Now for 2019, there is some more better data on costumes, which is superheroes and vampires are up there for adults, and a lot of these are a bit more classic costumes. Witches are one of those that have really stood the test of time, partly because it's not super hard and you can find different types of witch costumes. Anyway, pirates and zombies were also up there, and I feel like those have been a big part of the pop culture scene for the last 20 years or so. For kids, princesses, superhero costumes, and also specific ones like Batman and Spider-Man, so Avenger characters from the top. But aside from that, more pop culture-y, there was It, the Clown, Chucky, Fortnite-related costumes, unicorns, and 1980s throwbacks, and I feel like the last two have also been popular for a while. Now let's come up with some ideas for 2020. Now probably most people will be staying in for Halloween 2020, but I'm going to take some guesses on costumes. For those just at home, they may reach into their closet and pull out a witch's hat or some face makeup and some little cat ears and do one of those simple costumes, or if they already have a different costume, since they won't be going anywhere, maybe just a Zoom call or something. For those getting more creative, I could see Karen costumes, maybe dressing up as a germ or mask or a hand sanitizer bottle. Then there will probably be some from Tiger King, like Carol Baskin, and of course, election-inspired costumes. So thank you for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you want to see more content on the generations or just overtime type things. And I will see you next time.